Good evening. My name is Dr. Kevin Navarro. I'm the head of school here at Greensboro Montessori School. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are here tonight to talk about learning. We're in a school, so that seems appropriate. However, when you really get down to what learning is, when you really remember what the foundational processes are, what the pedagogies are, what the science behind it, what the research is, schools like ours or schools like some of the other Montessori schools represented here, we sometimes forget how fortunate we are that we teach and learn every single day the way children are supposed to learn and be and act. There's so many schools in our country right now that don't have that luxury and don't have the ability to do that. So it's something that we're very grateful for, and it's something we're often reflecting on, how we can do our practice the best we can here at Greensboro Montessori School. We're dialoguing about what are our proof points, what articulates our mission, how are we being successful as a school. And as we continue that dialogue, we wanted to invite a friend to join that conversation. And so Dr. Stephen Hughes is with us tonight, and he's bringing with him a research perspective, a neuroscience, a neuropsychological perspective to add to our conversation of why Montessori. So Steve comes to us from, right now, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and let me get my introduction notes. There it is. Technology, what are you going to do? Steve right now is a pediatric neuropsychologist and director of the Center for Research of Developmental Education. 3 areas of Steve's research that he's done for a while that are all great Montessori experiential things. He's very interested in executive functioning, social emotional learning and skills, moral learning, moral reasoning. He and his wife have a long-standing relationship with Montessori. Steve's taken his neuroscience practice, and it was interesting. He might tell the story later tonight, but I asked, what was your first hook? And he was that parent in the carpool line when his daughter was 2 years old that he kept grilling the teachers. For the teachers in the room, you know you have those parents. Like, he would keep asking questions, and his brain kept turning and turning and turning, saying, now why do you do that? Wait, what's that? Oh, that's fascinating. Why is that? Have you thought about doing that? And he eventually got hooked and saying, wait a sec, this is right. This is what learning is. This is what learning should be. And he eventually drove some of his research down that area and turned some of his speaking engagements and his professional career wedding together those 2 pieces of neuropsychology and neuroscience and the Montessori approach. His wife also is a Montessori trainer, and they've had a long-standing relationship with both AMI and AMS around the country. And tonight we've asked Steve to come just to join our conversation and offer his perspective on the research of the Montessori approach and why it's right, and why those of us who work at Montessori schools, those of us who are here at Greensboro Montessori School, we're really fortunate that we get to learn and teach and think in a place that is actually designed the way our brains are supposed to go. So Steve, thank you for being here. Love to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Kevin, for that nice introduction, and thank you all for coming here this evening. Audio is okay? You can hear this fine? I think there's going to be some people who might stream in a little bit over time on account of the traffic situation, and I'm fine with that. Make space for them so they don't have to stand, or they have to experience the shame of coming to the front. I also want to thank Jillian. Where's Jillian? Thank you for helping to make this happen. In record speed, too. I mean, it was like one phone call, boom, we're done, we're set. Here's the date, how it's all happening. I also want to thank Rhea. Where's Rhea? Thank you for the lovely tour and for picking me up today. Andy Bogan, where are you? Andy helped set up. Thank you. Invaluable role. Again, thank you all for having me here. So we're starting a little bit late because of traffic. We're booked for 2 hours, and I'm not going to talk for 2 hours, but I'll talk for about an hour and a half, generally speaking. And that means we might run out of time at the end. But I'm very happy to hang around for anybody who wants to ask some questions if we go past our designated time. Is that okay with all of you? I also like to get a sense about who's in the audience. Who's a Greensboro Montessori teacher? Okay. Who's a parent? Okay. Who's from another Montessori program in the region? Thanks for coming. Any grandparents in the audience? Grandparents of Montessori students? Okay. Anybody who's just curious about Montessori and doesn't really have a strong connection yet? Oh, hey, good for you. Well, maybe you'll get something out of this tonight. I hope so. I hope so. And then finally, before we get started, how many people are here tonight? Let's just see a quick show of hands. Yeah, so clearly there's some people still stuck in traffic. And I want to tell you something else. I normally don't like to have the lights be this bright because it's been my experience that the audience is really uptight when it's this bright. Can you make a promise to me tonight to like not be uptight? Can you do that? Okay? Because really, okay. Because I try to keep it fairly informal, and I would like to save questions for the end if we can do that. But I also, I really like this topic. This is my favorite thing to talk about is Montessori. And it's much less fun when the audience is kind of constrained. So now, having said this, who knows if you're going to experience it this way, but there will be moments when I might try to make a joke, okay? For example. Now, you might miss those moments, but if you should happen to catch a moment that sounds like I'm trying to be funny, you can be very charitable, and even if it's bright, you can still, okay. Thank you. I guess I want to now ask one more question. Who is concerned about how their child is going to make it in the world? Who's concerned about how they're going to do? Okay. One other question: who is a Montessorian themselves? Who had a Montessori experience growing up? Sorry, yeah. Who grew up in a Montessori school? Sorry, that's not the right question. Yeah. Who's a Montessori child? Okay. So most of you are not Montessori children, but you have chosen or are interested in Montessori for your child. And do you ever worry that they're not going to a real school? It's okay if you have a little bit of like, yeah, but, okay? Because, of course, you're wondering and you're worried about, will Montessori give them what they need to succeed, right? Like out in the real world, once they leave the Montessori sphere, which it's very nice, right? And I had a lovely tour with Rhea today, and the children are beautiful, as Kevin and I were talking earlier. They say hello, and they do it in a very natural way, not a scripted, not a trained-up kind of way. They say hello, and they look at your eyes because it's a very person-to-person connection. And maybe that was part of the draw when you were learning about Montessori and you visited here. But it's not unnatural or uncommon for parents who have children in a non-traditional pedagogy to kind of say, yeah, well, hope we're not going to regret this later. Because you're wondering, are they going to get what they need to succeed? And I'm going to begin by talking about what you need to succeed. Okay? Okay, one more. Who here has succeeded? Nobody likes to claim that. Well, I can give you some examples of what some major employers think you need to succeed. I want to begin by talking about Google, and some of you may know that the founders of Google were Montessori children, and believe me, the Montessori world has been making an absolute meal out of the fact that the Google guys were Montessori kids for quite a long time. So long that that's really water under the bridge at this point. But yeah, the Google guys, they met each other in college, and it's like, oh my God, you said it's Montessori, that's the connection, unbelievable, And again, we've been making hay out of that in the Montessori world for a long time. And who has heard those weird stories about how Google conducts interviews for new employees? Kind of wacky stuff, right? Like how many golf balls would fit into, pick your local stadium, right? That kind of thing. And there are these problem-solving exercises. They want to see kind of what kind of analytical mind you've got and how you would solve these crazy puzzles. In fact, they don't do that anymore because they found out that whether or not you can solve how many golf balls would fit into whatever local stadium is kind of irrelevant, because knowing how to solve that problem predicts nothing about how well you'll perform at Google. Isn't that interesting? People who are good at brain teaser-like puzzles aren't necessarily good at working at Google. And in fact, maybe you know some people who are good at clever brain teaser-type puzzles, and maybe you've noticed that even people who are good at brain teaser-like puzzles, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at other things. In fact, you could say that being good at brain teaser-like puzzles is kind of a special skill set, and people who are motivated to figure those things out, they become pretty good at figuring these things out, but it doesn't mean that they know how to be a partner, a parent, or an employee. They're good at solving brain teaser-like puzzles. And they have a whole list of things that they don't care about now, because they have found through their own internal research that college GPA is worthless as a criterion for hiring, that test scores don't predict anything about who will be a good employee at Google. Okay, to be fair, yeah, GPA from university, it contributes a little bit, at least if they're new, right? If you're right out of university, yeah, okay, GPA, that, but not very much. But to be fair, it does predict a little bit. The brain teasers, complete waste of time. And just, think about that. Brain teasers are kind of a narrow skill set, and if that was your thing, you might devote the time and attention to figure out the tricks and the way these things kind of work. And if you have a certain kind of analytical mind, you love that kind of thing. It's like catnip, right? But it doesn't mean that you're going to be a good employee or a good partner or a good parent. It's a kind of narrow skill set. And what's emerging now is that it's the same thing for doing well at school and getting good grades. Not that you shouldn't, right? Okay? But it's kind of a narrow skill set that has to do with lining up all the things that you're supposed to do so that you can get a good grade, and then doing those things, and then getting the good grade, so that you can get access to a privileged educational opportunity at the post-secondary level, so that you can go work for an important big company and make money, like go work for Google. Except what Google has figured out is that that skill set, that is how to be good at school and get good grades in advance, it doesn't help them in knowing if you're going to be any good at being a Google employee, because doing well at school is a specialized, narrow skill set. It's really hard to wrap your brain around that. It doesn't mean you'll be good at other things. Which is not to say that you shouldn't try to be good at that too, because being good at that will help gain access to privileged educational opportunities and maybe a scholarship. You know what predicts how well people will do in school? You know what the strongest predictor of how well you'll do in school is? How well you've been doing at school. That's the strongest predictor. And it doesn't predict how well you'll do at Google or any place else, because it's a narrow, special skill set. It's a desirable skill set to gain access to privileged educational opportunities, that is right. But it doesn't make you better prepared, to win at Google. In fact, there is a kind of question that they have found. You can see this is the Senior Vice President for People Operations. Of course he's the Senior Vice President for People Operations, right? He can't just be personnel or human resources. It's people operations, right? But there is a question that is very predictive of how well someone will do at Google. And their whole interview process is oriented around questions like this. Give me an example of a time when you solved an analytically difficult problem. Highly predictive of performance at Google. And why do you suppose that is? I think you can hazard a guess, because you know what you do at Google as a Google employee? You solve analytically difficult problems. And it turns out that there isn't a syllabus, and there isn't a date for the mid-quarter and the final exam, and there's not a textbook which for some reason contains the entire embodiment of everything apparently that you're supposed to know about a subject area, and all you have to do is master the textbook and write a couple of essays and take 3 tests, and then you get your A. Yeah, that's actually not an analytically difficult problem. It's kind of like getting a PhD in the social sciences. The dirty little secret is you just have to want to get a PhD in the social sciences hard enough to slog through the hours and effort that it takes to do it, okay? Sorry. I have a PhD in the social sciences. It's not that hard. But you've got to want to get a PhD, okay? It's a motivational problem. It's a motivational problem. Getting good grades at school. There's some capability, yes. Intelligence predicts, yes. But the best predictor of who's going to do well at school are those who are motivated to do well at school. And that's great. But it's not an analytically difficult problem. You just got to want it bad enough. Whether it's because you're required to from your family, or because this is your identity, that you're a good student. And I'm not against being a good student. It just turns out that the more we push this in education, the further we get from creating conditions that give children experience and practice at solving analytically difficult problems. We can talk about the research that's been internal at Ernst Young. It turns out that Ernst Young's own internal research has revealed that there is no evidence to conclude that previous success in higher education correlates with future success. This is from a British newspaper, in subsequent professional qualifications undertaken. You know what that means? That college GPA doesn't predict who's going to be a good employee at Ernst Young. In fact, they don't really care what you studied. They like you to have a college degree. That's right. And what? It doesn't matter. How can you say it doesn't matter? Because our research shows that it doesn't matter. Because doing well at school, which, hear me, is a desirable thing, and it's fine, good on you for doing well at school. And the contributors to the things that you need to do to be good at school, you have to be intelligent enough, and you have to have a high enough, probably upper half of a dimension of personality called conscientiousness. Okay, it's a component of personality. Yeah, conscientiousness and higher intelligence. I mean, like kind of higher, right? Upper half of average. Yeah, these things contribute. But they don't contribute. Well, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. They contribute to how well you do at school. They contribute to how well you do at everything. But doing how well you do at school itself is not a strong predictor of anything that actually matters once you leave the education world. IBM commissioned research that was survey research of 1,700 CEOs. Can you imagine? When's the last time you talked to 1,700 CEOs in 64 countries across 18 major industries? And these individuals who were part of this survey research said that leaders and employees in the global economy must be able to innovate. They must be capable of analytical thinking. They must know how to collaborate. They must know how to be creative. They must be creative. They must seek opportunities in chaos. They must leverage complexity. And they have to communicate effectively. None of the 1,700 CEOs said, and they have to do really well on their SATs. Because doing really well on your SATs, which is a desirable outcome because it gains you access to privileged educational opportunities, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter once you're done with school. Okay? It doesn't matter. 1,700 CEOs from 64 countries and 18 industries around the world, they already know that. Okay? Now, I'm telling you all this stuff about how unimportant this is. And in a little while, I'm going to tell you how well Montessori students do on this, okay? Which is kind of weird. But the thing to bear in mind is we could be a school that is about that. And that's right. If it's only about that, you'll get good at doing that. Montessori children are also good at doing that. You could be only about that, and then you'll get access to a privileged educational opportunity. That's right, okay? You won't really have developed any of the skills necessary to meet the requirements that 1,700 CEOs in 18 industries across 40 countries, all those dang countries think matter. Okay, so it won't make you be better at the job. And there's something even crazier about this business. I have to go back to a study from 1988, and I have to parse a little language for you. So they did this analysis of student performance, and they had 3 feedback conditions for the students. You understand what I mean by that? One feedback condition was just teacher comments about the quality of their work and what they were doing right and what they weren't doing, I guess, I don't know, right or well, whatever, right? Comments only. Another condition was grades. And a third condition was comments and grades. So that sounds an awful lot like educational assessment. And if you would think that, well, it makes me nervous that if your child goes to a school where they don't do grades and they do comments, you might think, well, yeah, how well are they really doing? Okay? Well, here's what they found in this study, that there was a motivational impact of grades. Okay? They did better, they improved when they had comments. They stopped improving after they got a grade, and they didn't improve after they got grades and comments. You understand what I mean? So feedback about their performance that was descriptive and maybe even a bit prescriptive, but not evaluative, help them to continue to gain in their performance. But the moment that evaluative element was added, B, C, God help us, D, improvement ended. Even when there was still the feedback about how to do better. Just the mere presence of the grade stops growth. It must in some way help the child define themselves, right? It must in some way impact their self-understanding. Oh, I guess I'm a B student in math. But you could be an A student, and maybe you can even get information about these are the things you need to work on, do a little more practicing up on the basic skills, get your math tables really, you got to get them solid so they're not going to get in your way when you're doing the more complex stuff. Okay, if you do that, I think you're going to be great. Oh, okay, I can do that. Unless I tell you that you're a B student. Evaluative feedback stops growth. Yeah, so what you need to succeed? Well, you need the underlying mechanisms, the capabilities, the skills, the architecture, the structures necessary to solve analytically difficult problems. That's what the world wants and needs. And that will, by the way, also help you do well at school, which is why the Montessori children do so well at school. But you get the school performance as kind of a byproduct of having a better, cleaner, more efficient brain. That's what you really get from Montessori. You get a brain that has had the experiences that nature's design indicates that you kind of need to have in order to build the underlying neurologic structures that you need to succeed at school, at Google, at Ernst Young, opening a retail shop, being a welder, knowing how to look around, figure out what needs to be done, and do it wherever you happen to be. You need that. Let's talk about what that is all about. Let's talk about the brain. We're looking at, obviously, an external view of the brain. You can see the surface of the brain. Now it's got all those folds and caverns in it, crevices. And I want to say a little bit about the skin of the brain, the neocortex. I'm going to talk about what the purpose of that is. You probably think your brain is for thinking. And why wouldn't you? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking your brain is for thinking. Well, the neocortex is about the size of the kind of linen napkin you might get at a restaurant if you folded it all flat. And it's just a few millimeters thick. It's so thin. It's so big. And within that just few millimeters of thickness, there's at least 6 layers of interconnecting, 6 layers there's connections across 6 layers of neurons in that brain. It's extraordinarily complex in the interconnections across and within layers. It's the most, you've heard this, the brain is the most complex object ever identified. It's total crazy complex and complicated. And you think that it's for thinking. And why wouldn't you think that? How much thinking did you bring to the task of driving your car here tonight? You know how to drive a car. And I'm going to propose to you that you were talking to somebody, or you were talking on the phone, or you were texting, which was a bad idea, or you were cursing traffic, which I think probably, given the conditions, is probably a very appropriate thing to do tonight. But you weren't thinking about driving. Now, why weren't you thinking about driving? Because you know how to drive. So driving is a solved problem for your brain. In fact, there was a time when you didn't know how to drive, and then your brain was very busy with figuring out how to drive, and then it figured it out. And after it was figured out, you don't really have to devote a lot more to it. In fact, the things that the neocortex does is it, from birth, begins to construct a sensory motor model of the world. And you know what I mean by that? Like when you sat down on this chair, you've seen this chair before. You know how this chair works. In fact, you know how chairs work. But there was a time when you didn't, because your sensory motor map of the world did not include this, representation of a chair. And the way a chair works is you move back up to it. You can tell how close you are, and then you sit down. That's how it works, right? You didn't have to think about that because that is part of your existing sensory motor map of the world. I remember when my daughter didn't know how to sit down yet. She'd stand up in her crib and then she'd scream bloody murder because she didn't know how to sit down yet. And it probably felt like she was going to let off into the void, right? Okay. So it builds a sensory motor map of the world. It processes sensorial input, which you're doing right now. You're having auditory and visual, and you're having kinesthetic feedback. But because you have the capacity to selectively direct your attention, you're not noticing, until I mention it, how it feels on your back or on your bottom to sit in that chair. You maybe will before too much longer tonight. It remembers sequences, like the sequence of operations necessary to seat a body in a chair or to type your email password. That's a sequence. Or to type the URL for your web-based email, or to turn on the computer, or to make a cup of coffee, or to greet your children in the morning. That's a sequence. These are all sequences. Now, there was a time when you didn't have sequences, and part of constructing a sensory motor map of the world also meant developing and retaining these complex motor sequences. And we're still creating new complex motor sequences, but at this point in our lives, for most of us, we're stringing together novel combinations of existing motor sequences. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah, and so what makes the Olympics so incredible is that you see the figure skating and people extraordinarily complex. It's just sensory motor sequences refined to an extraordinary level of precision, a level of precision that I'm sure none of us can reach, or at this point in our lives could reach. And all it is just a complex sensory motor sequence that's played back. You know, at the level of the Olympics, it's kind of a head game. If I can stay out of my head and just let my body play back the sensory motor sequence that is this figure skating routine, I can win the gold. But I have to let the sequence play. And we're making predictions about the future. Even as I move around here, I have certain expectations about how the world is in the part of the world that's outside of my field of view. I know I can slide this way because my brain is predicting that there's space here. And in fact, there's a lot of things that you do over the course of a day. You drink from a cup of water, and you know how cups operate. You know about water and mass and liquids, and so you can make predictions about what's going to happen. You know what does get you thinking is when you set down the cup on what you think is going to be a fixed surface, but it turns out that underneath the tablecloth there was a hole, and something unpredictable happened. Okay, so your brain detects anomalies in the pattern. It detects an anomalous outcome given the pattern that it was expecting. That's a flat surface. This is a tablecloth. This must be a table. It should be solid. I set it down, it spills. Whoa, what happened here? Because my brain was predicting something and it was wrong because the pattern wasn't what I thought it was. Yeah, so all that stuff is examples of your brain not really thinking, just playing back sensory motor sequences. And of course, a young child, well, they don't have very sophisticated sensory motor sequences yet. They can't walk, they can't stand, they can't feed themselves. But as you watch your child develop, they're not just developing control of their body, but they're developing these programs, these patterns, these sequences, these things about how the way the world works. And before long, you master something about how the world works, and you know that that's what that surface is. That surface will be hard. I can walk on that. That one's wet. That might be slippery. Oops, I didn't see that it was wet. I missed that, and I slipped, okay? Yeah, because I predicted something different from what happened. So yeah, it has to think so it can stop thinking to know what, okay, let me put it this way. You have to know what to do in a new situation. Well, you don't, if it's a novel situation, you have to figure out what to do in that new situation. And that figuring out is thinking. The first time you encounter somebody who treats you like this, whoa, this guy is rude or crazy or something. I'm not quite sure how to handle this situation. If you worked at a facility for people who had emotional and behavioral problems or mental illnesses, you would probably develop a skill set to know how to handle that. That's what it's like to work in customer service, right? Okay, so it figures out how to address a new situation that it's come across. And then with repeated exposure, it develops that pattern so that it can stop thinking about it. Because most of the time, you're not thinking about it. Most of the time, you're just playing back the triggered sequences. Models in general, they're also domain-specific, and so it's not really thinking. Well, it's thinking to the extent that you can master a sequence so that you can stop thinking. And then it just becomes remembering. The purpose of your brain is to match patterns, playback sequences, do the appropriate behavioral response given the sensorial information that's coming in. And that's how you got good at your job. That's how you got good at your profession. I used to tell trainees when I was at the University of Minnesota who were there to learn how to become pediatric neuropsychologists, there's just no substitute for your first 200 neuropsychological evaluations. You just have to do this a bunch of times. It's like that at your job, isn't it? You just have to do it a bunch of times. Becoming a Montessori teacher, here's the secret on the presentations. You just have to do them a bunch of times until you have it memorized, until it's in your bones. So then it's just remembering. I mean, then it's perceiving, deciding, or reflexively producing what your brain thinks is the right response, and then sometimes it's not, and then readjusting. There's an excellent book that covers this territory very nicely called Unintelligence by the man who introduced the Palm Pilot. Remember that smartphone, the first smartphone? Yeah, he invented the Palm Pilot, and he was always like a neuroscience geek, and now he's wealthy enough to have his own neuroscience institute, and he writes about this theory, the patterns of the fundamental currency of intelligence. The fundamental currency of pattern matching. In this situation, I should do this. How quickly can your brain assemble the thing to do when this is present? When I see this, I do this. And when I see that, I do this. And that's how I can adaptively and skillfully navigate in the world so that I can survive. Your brain doesn't compute the answers to problems, it retrieves the answers from memory. The pattern memory, the sequence memory is stored, but it has to be constructed. The sequence memory is played back, but it must first be constructed. What would it be like to have a very constrained developmental experience? I mean, this has happened where, through mental illness on the part of parents or horrible things can happen, right? And what you find is that when children have had a very constrained opportunity to engage in interaction with the world, they don't develop much. They don't develop sensory motor sequences that allow them to adaptively and skillfully navigate through the world, because there's only one way you develop those things. There's only one way you develop the programming, the sensory motor sequences, the what to do when, the drive the car, the be the teacher, to be the parent, to be the partner. Turns out being a partner is, there's elements of skill associated with that. And anyone who has been married knows that a relationship is work. Yes, that's right. It's work. You have to develop, you have to learn what to do when, based upon how you view your partner, and then you have to keep practicing. You have to keep it up. Okay, right. So the way that you build those sensory motor sequences that are stored in the neocortex, that are the foundation of all the reflexive things that we do when we're not thinking, because we're mostly not, we have to build that brain. And we build that brain by doing things, okay, by our interaction with the world. And there's one more thing about the brain that you might find interesting. Your brain's representation of your body. As you sit there, your body, everyone bathes, I'm sure. Like, so you get out of the shower in the morning, you know that body, right? Still got it, you do that thing, right? Okay? So that's not your brain's version of your body. This is your brain's version of your body, okay? Yeah, and so what's interesting about this is that, why is it so overrepresented in the hand, also the mouth? But yeah, because we're not humans being. We're not human beings. Yeah, we think we're human. We're humans doing. Okay, so the way that we survive as animals in the world is by manipulating the environment, right? By engaging in engaging. What does it mean to engage? Engage means to dig into, right? So we've got to engage the environment to find food, to consume food, to defend ourselves, whatever. Because it's our interaction with the world that kind of defines us. Our skillful interaction with the world is what allowed our species to evolve. Continuing better, skillful interaction with the world. Interaction, action, behavior, movement. So that neocortex has got to get built. And the only way it gets built is if this guy gets to do things. So more opportunities, richer neocortex, more patterns, more diversity, more refinement of those patterns. And so really what you need to survive, what you need to achieve in the world is you need to have a neocortex that knows how to do a lot of things and is good at developing new things. okay? Not just knows how to do a lot of things, but the apparatus, the mechanics, the machinery needed to construct new sensory motor patterns is tuned up, it's mature, it's well developed. And there's only one way that it can get where it needs to be. It needs to do things. It needs to be able to do lots of things. The brain needs to construct itself by building these fundamental, foundational sensory motor patterns and then link those together into more complex patterns and to link those together into new complex patterns. And as it's doing so, it causes the apparatus that does the construction to become more mature and more functional. And that's what Montessori from 3 to 6 fundamentally is. This is not the entirety of the curriculum, but you can see the practical life, language, math, and sensorial materials, all of which are presented in an individualized, sequential manner, all of which build upon previous knowledge and capabilities, all of which build on previous sensory motor patterns that are repeated by children at will and deliberately to the point of automation, of perfection, I guess you could say. It's what he's doing here, okay? So let's watch him for a minute. So the pink tower, many of you are familiar with this is a sensorial material. The direct aim of the pink tower is to help children learn to apprehend differences in size, right? And he doesn't know how to apprehend differences in size yet. His sensorial system is still developing because he's only 3. So he's not there yet. He's working on it. And it's interesting, too. We're seeing something about nature's design here because he's quite concentrated on this activity. So he's at a developmental age where it must be like he can detect there's differences, but he cannot clearly differentiate the differences. Does that seem fair? I think it's kind of like if you speak a second language, kind of, and you go to that country, and it's like, oh, wow, I'm pedaling hard to keep up, but I can kind of get the gist of it. There must be some kind of visual version of that for him at this stage. And he's not very good at it yet, is he? But let's watch him for a little while. So you know the answer. Is he concentrating? He's engrossed in this activity. Is that fair? So that means he's motivated, right? Why is he motivated to do this? But it's cool to him. Now, of course, while he's learning how to apprehend by size, he's also perfecting his fine motor movements. He's learning how to, he's perfecting that sensory motor map of the world, right? This is how objects, large to small, this is how their mass shifts. This is how hard I need to move my hand. This is how carefully I need to move my hand. So he's practicing refining his motor control. No, that's not it. Whoops, no, this is mine. This will be my victory. Yeah, okay, yeah, go kid, go. Yeah, I'm gonna, now that other child, they weren't really supposed to do that, were they? So there's a rule in Montessori, you can observe, you can ask to join and help and do with, but if they say no, you gotta keep your hands to yourself. And that was a failure of a child, that child, I guess to put it in analytical terms, was a failure of self-control, right, okay? It was a failure of self-control. Yeah, like you came out of the womb with self-control, right? Okay, so how did you develop self-control? Oh, I know. Whoops, I know I shouldn't have done that. Ooh, but that is so attractive. Oh, but I know I'm not supposed to. And so you see the children in the Montessori classroom with their hands buried in their pockets. Oh boy, no, he's got it wrong. He's not gonna get it, I can get it, let me do it, right? They do that, they sit on their hands. They practice self-control. How do you develop self-control? Oh, by practicing it. Oh, because it turns out none of us came out of the womb with self-control. So having an environment that affords us endless opportunities to restrain ourselves from, seizing the victory out of this guy's hands, yeah, that's practice. Should they be perfect? No. If they weren't perfect, we wouldn't have to work on it. And then we wouldn't have to create an environment that afforded them endless opportunities to practice self-control. But because humans need to develop that, the whole architecture of the brain that is involved in behavioral self-regulation, because we have to develop that, why don't we create conditions in a developmental environment where they get to practice that? And yeah, they're going to get it wrong. Of course they're going to get it wrong, because they didn't come out of the womb with self-control. So we develop that architecture by creating opportunities to practice it. And again, that's how everything is developed. This is the development of the neocortex from age 4 to young adulthood. And there's a pattern to this, there's a sequence to this, but the most important thing to remember about this is that there's something a little bit unique about human beings. The lower you go on the animal, the lower you go to the more primitive animals, the intelligence that even the lowest forms of life possess was simply developed through evolution, okay? So there's a kind of intelligence, and we'll look at some examples here in a minute. There's a kind of internal intelligence in lower animal life forms. What's a little bit unique about us is that, you could say our evolutionary adaptive secret weapon is that we develop those capacities, okay? The intelligence is not innate. The capacity for massive intelligence, that's what's innate. And the way we develop that intelligence, the way we train the neocortex, the way we learn how to develop self-control, we did come out of the womb with it, right? So what's unique to human beings is that what you see here, most of it's optional, okay? Most of it's, the good stuff is optional. The stuff that is what you need to succeed. Yeah, that development is optional. And yes, as an organism, as an animal, human beings have to learn to skillfully and adaptively interact with and get what they need from the world. That is correct. You need to do that. And it's pretty fundamental. And so, yeah, the bar is kind of low for basic survival. But I don't think that you're thinking about basic survival for your children, are you? No, you want that bar high. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, this is what you want. You want that well-developed. You want a rich sensory motor behavioral repertoire to lay the foundations for all the cool higher things that they're going to be doing, like taking care of you when you're too old, right? Okay, yeah. And again, it's optional. All the good stuff is optional. You can have experiences that promote the development of that complex, sophisticated sensory motor network and capability, or you can fail to have those experiences. And it's pretty fundamental. Yeah, the bar is low for basic survival, but I know that you're aiming higher than that. And the way you develop those capabilities, yeah, we looked at a couple with that guy. Practice. You got to have focus. You got to care about the thing you're doing, so you got to be motivated. We already talked a bit about the way you develop self-control is by opportunities to practice self-control, right? So there's a nice way to sum it all up. What you need to be able to do to build this, right? Just a few words, and if you remember nothing else from this talk tonight, try to remember these, although I hope that you remember more of that. To build that, here's the problem. This is why you don't speak 3 languages, most of you, because it's hard, okay? But if you fall in love with somebody who spoke a language other than your own, probably the motivation would be pretty high. You'd be willing to engage in the effort necessary to learn the language of love with you and your sweetheart, okay? Yeah, you would, but you haven't yet because that's not your situation. And it's hard to learn a second language or a third language or whatever. It's hard. And we don't have opportunities. We don't have the requirement to do it here. So yeah, we exert our effort in other places because we don't have sufficient motivation to learn that second language. Or for that matter, we all know that we should be doing more exercise, and maybe we should be doing coordinated physical exercise. Maybe we should be learning how to ballroom dance or do that Tai Chi thing or whatever. Maybe yoga. Yeah, I've been intending to do that, but I haven't done it yet because I have insufficient motivation. And the way I'm going to master that Tai Chi, that yoga, that ballroom dancing, or that pink tower is by repeated practice at it. Just like that's how I master self-control, by repeated opportunities to exercise self-control. And we already saw it with our champion there with the pink tower. It's got to be repeated, lots of efforts, lots of shots on goal. We only saw him construct it once, but that wasn't the first time he'd been there, and it's not the last. So it's got to be repeated, and it's got to be trial and error. And fundamentally, it comes down to a whole series of experimental interactions with, if this does here, does that work? How about that? How hard do I push it? Is that too hard? Do I push it less hard than that? It's all experimental interactions designed to elicit the feedback that helps you gain precision in the development of that sensory motor model, of that extension of the sensory motor map of the world, so that you don't have to think about it anymore. Any one of us here can build the pink tower without really, it's not that interesting. But for our guy there, it's really interesting, because this is right at his developing ability level. And it seems to be nature's design that if we don't mess with him, he'll find that interesting. It's nature's design that they are drawn to activities. Why do children, there's a famous story, Montessori observing children balancing on the curb, in Italy, right? Why do they do that? Why do they do that at a certain age? And why does it feel, in fact, I don't like it when the presenter, does theatrical stuff. So, ooh, look at me, It feels stupid. It feels dumb. It feels childish for me to walk on the line like that. Because that's not a developmentally necessary activity. For a child of the right age, it's like, oh, God, where has this been all my life? This is exactly the practice that I need, to refine my vestibular sense and, to continue the refinement and perfectionment, if you want to use a word like that, of my sensory motor system. But they'll love it because that's what they need. That's what they need. So that's why we give it to them. Okay, so yeah, we want to build that. We got to give them the opportunities to engage in that kind of behavior. And we know a lot, about the developmental course of this. We know that even from conception through early adolescence, there's continuing development of things. And you're a sophisticated audience, you know that. So we're doing the sensorial pathways, language, higher cortical function. And this is just 1 year of age, right? We haven't even hit Montessori age 3 yet. Well, this isn't saying that this is all the development and it's done. No, this is foundational development that is ripe for refinement, okay? The architecture starts getting built and it's up to us to do it. And you know that. You're a sophisticated audience. You do things like this. Why do you do this? So that Matthew can figure it out and practice it and do it himself. That's why we pour in the Montessori class. That's why we do all these things that are about learning how to run the body. Because, when it's about how to hold the pencil, it can't be about how to write poetry, right? Okay? So the sooner we get the fundamentals, the fundamental sensory motor patterning, the sooner we get that done, the better we can move on. The sooner we can move on to more abstract, more of the things that we think of as cognitive activities. So there's the Montessori planes light around that. Yeah, first plane, second plane, looks like everything's done by the third plane, but that's not really true because we're laying down some fundamental architecture in the first 6 years. We're refining through continuing practice. It's like we build the brain in the first plane, we put it to work and refine it in the second plane, and that process continues into the third plane. So that's it. That's how we do it. The reason we do these things is because the only way we can build that is by giving this guy opportunities to engage in this kind of activity. That's it. It's the only way. So, okay, we could create opportunities for children to engage in lots and lots of effortful, motivated, repeated, trial and error, experimental interactions with the environment, which is how you construct sensory motor coupling, which is the things that lay the foundation for skillful, adaptive engagement with the world. Okay, because we're humans doing, not humans being. Okay, so that means we have to know how to do things. Really, what's the purpose of all of it? How about this? How about this for your children? That they have the capacity for freedom and independent moral agency in the world. How about that, huh? Freedom, independent moral agency. That they can make choices, they can be an actor, they can affect change in the world, and change that's for good. I mean, try aiming higher than that. That's what you want. That means you got to have a brain that has got it, that has got the basics nailed down, that has been able to explore the basics, to locate its own source of motivation, of curiosity. Why is he doing the pink tower that day? Because the pink tower was speaking to him, and he's learning to hear that, because he has the freedom and opportunity to do that. And it's not like everybody's got their pink tower, and the teacher says, okay, people, it's time to put away your pink towers. But wait, I almost had it. I swear to God, this was the day. Ignore that voice inside, because now it's time to move to our workbooks, because that's not helpful. Okay? That denies, that erases the motivation, right? Well, what's the point? Why even? Praise it, sister, yeah. So what we're proposing is that this approach to education, it's not a content-oriented approach. It's not a directed approach. You could say it's kind of a facilitated approach, but I think from this context, I mean, if you look at it in this framework, it's kind of inescapable. If you want to build that complex sensory motor processor that can think about the hard things now, like what the next novel experience that it's going to create in the world, the thing that's never been here before, yeah, let's string together that sensory motor sequence. Let's put that together. Well, okay, if we're going to do that, we better have these things worked out, because if it's still about how to hold the pencil, it can't be about how to write the poetry. And if we start writing the poetry at age 5 or 6, well, I don't know, how many poems do we have written by age 10, when maybe a lot of children, or let's say 8, maybe are just getting their first exposure to that with a chunky crayon or whatever. My ages are wrong, but you get the point. Because when it's about how to hold the pencil, it can't be about how to write poetry. So if you understand that this is a basic need for the development of the nervous system, we think of it as the brain, right? Okay, yeah. Then this is what it has to be if it's going to be education for life. And that's what Montessori called it, education for life. All the stuff you need to get squared away, so nailed down, that then beginning at a remarkably early age, you have the opportunity to follow your instincts, get the feeling for what your soul says to you, and to demonstrate independent moral agency in the world. You could do worse. Education for life. Let's just do a brief recapitulation about life. Yep, that's evolution, milestones of vertebrate evolution. And there are some things that have guided the development of us, okay? There are some fundamental principles that really, when it comes down to it, let's put it in very prosaic language. Anything that was going to survive, has to be, any animal, anything that moves, eats, or could be eaten, has got to figure out how to perceive the environment, evaluate that information, anticipate outcomes, select an appropriate action, select an appropriate behavior, and take action. This is the mechanism of life, and really this is a mechanism of evolution. You land in a niche, and fast movement is a survival trait, so yeah, fast movement will survive, or accurate perception, or or you live in a cave, and so visual perception doesn't matter. Well, that aspect of perception is going to disappear over time because it's not selected for, but some other aspect of perception might be selected for, because anything that moves needs to eat or can be eaten. Anything that moves, needs to eat, can be eaten, is capable of movement, has got to figure out how to move to eat, move to escape, or stop moving, and there'll be evolutionary pressure supporting that, because the basic mechanism of survival for any animal is the ability to look around, figure out what needs to be done, and do it. Oh, just like surviving at Google. Wow. Wow, that's right. Yeah, which is why knowing how to solve analytically difficult problems may aid in your survival at Google, because that will allow you to, with great sophistication, look around, figure out what needs to be done, and do it. And if your primary goal right now in this chapter in your life is to get those A's, that's good, because you want access to a privileged educational opportunity. That's fine. It's not a sin. You probably have intelligence. You probably have high conscientiousness. But, that's not all you need. In fact, who knows what KIPP schools are? Who's heard of KIPP? Knowledge is Power program. Take children from low-income backgrounds and high-risk communities and put them into an extremely intensive, some would say almost a boot camp-like experience. Okay? They would say we're not a boot camp experience. We drill them. We start school early in the morning. We go late at night. We have 2 hours or more of homework every night. We do school on Saturdays, and we do school in the summer. And by God, you know what those children get to do? They get scholarships to high schools, maybe even universities, because they get extraordinary test scores. In fact, in some districts, the highest test scores are the children who come from this kind of school background, because they have generally about 70% more exposure to academic material. Highly teacher-directed, highly content-oriented, they rock on the test scores, okay? High-risk children from, disadvantaged communities. And you know what happens when they get to college? They crater. Because college is a different skill set from knowing what you're supposed to know by the end of the week for that quiz. And for that matter, I'm not sure they developed this skill set. All they had to do was ride the KIPP chute, okay? Because if you're going to school from morning till night, have 2 hours of homework that you have to do every evening, and you're going to school on Saturdays and school in the summer, there's not a lot of decision-making that goes on there. And you know what happened when you hit college. Oh, yeah, I guess I have to make smart choices now in the face of all these competing sensorial stimuli, right? Yeah, okay. So let's talk about looking around, figuring out what needs to be done and doing it. Okay, well let's, it's pretty fundamental, people. Again, just a quick review. It's pretty basic. What's happening here? So we've got an amoeba, and we've got a couple of parameciums, and the amoeba has looked around, figured out where a food source is, and has gone to get it. And the parameciums have not noticed the threat, and now it's too late. Yeah, too late. Sorry. That's how it goes. It's pretty fundamental. Anything that moves, needs to eat, or could be eaten, has got to evolve a way to perceive the environment, make decisions about what it's going to do, be able to do those things, and then do them. Okay, so parameciums lose because they didn't detect the threat. Amoeba wins, it detected the threat. And it's the same case even with bacteria. You can go down to the very lowest life, right? Okay, yeah, that's what a bacterium looks like. And even a bacterium can perceive the environment through some kind of very primitive sensory organelles. And it has, again, the intelligence is baked in by evolution. But there is a selection mechanism that drives the flagellum toward more favorable conditions and away from less favorable conditions. Even a bacterium moves toward or moves away from. We can climb quite a few steps up the evolutionary ladder to the honeybee. Same mechanisms are there in like the block diagram of honeybee neurology. There are organs of perception. There are movement selection mechanisms, and there are action mechanisms. Because anything that moves, needs to eat, or could be eaten has got to be able to look around, make a decision about what it's going to do, and then execute it, right? And then do it. We can go to the highest form of life that we're aware of on our planet, which of course is us. And the same things pertain for human beings. What do you need to do well at Google? You've got to be able to look around, figure out what needs to be done, and do it. And they don't care. They don't care how you did in school, because that's a different set of capabilities. Now look, I care about how you did in school. Your children care about how they're going to do in school. Yes, that's how we gain access to privileged educational opportunities. So yeah, I didn't come here to say that test scores are dumb. The point is, though, that you can get the things that you need to do well in school that you can also do well with in other parts of life, like Google or Ernst Young. But if you only focus on the scores, you won't get those things. Because I'm going to say that there's a case for the general cognitive capability and the narrow skill set, right? Google wants the general cognitive capability. That's what they want. And again, it's fundamental throughout, here's from a brilliant 2001 article for both primitive organisms and the mammal. There's a mechanism, this selection process that mediates between permitting the current movement, switching to another, or stopping altogether. And how do you get good at that? How do you develop the capability to become skillful and adaptive in your engagement in the world? Well, nothing like practice. In fact, it's the only way. How do you get good at solving problems? How does that guy who knows how to do the weird kind of goofy brain teaser, how does he or she learn how to do it? This stuff is cool to them, and they devote enormous amounts of time to figuring out how to do those things. That's how they get good at it. How do the people who know how to solve analytically difficult problems get good at that? Oh, they have taken on opportunities to solve analytically difficult problems. Yeah, that's how they got good at that. And that's what Google wants. That's what Ernst Young wants. That's what 1,700 CEOs from around the world in 18 industries, that's what they want too. And they actually don't care how well you did at school, because that is a very specific, very narrow skill set. Dang it. It all seems so easy when all we had to do was to get good grades. But they're on to us. The people who are going to hire your children are not impressed by good grades, because they know that they don't matter. They're looking for a different skill set. They want people who know how to perceive the environment, evaluate information, anticipate outcomes, select an appropriate behavior, and take action. That's what all life wants, okay? That's how life works. Now, this makes it look sequential. No, it's probabilistic, it's multiply determined. What behavioral output gets produced is a product of many things. But the behavioral output can't be produced if the foundational sensory motor patterns that will be linked together to create that complex behavioral output are not yet well developed. The repertoire gets played, right? And novel new elements of the repertoire get added. There's no substitute for your first 200 neuropsychology reports. What's the analog where you work? if that architecture that is used to build those new patterns from the existing more primitive patterns, if that architecture, the mechanisms for building those patterns are well practiced, well exercised, refined, mature, tuned, you might just get through those 200 reports a little faster. You might just figure things out a little quicker. The first 200, those are the hard ones. The second 200, well, they're kind of hard too, but they don't take as long and you kind of are getting on top of your game. And the third 200 reports start getting fun. But it's not fun until you've gotten to that point, because you're putting the tools to work then, right? Then, what did it take to get the chops for your job? What is it? What's the equivalent? That's how it is everywhere. You've got to build the domain-specific sensory motor patterns so that you know exactly what to do here. You know how to write that report because you've done it a million times. So how are we doing so far? We started after about 6:20. It's now 7:20. We okay? Yeah. Okay. A little more to go. Okay. Let's look at some examples about how that process unfolds in the brain. Let's begin by talking about something that we do. We communicate, right? And probably many of you know that there are different parts of the brain, principally the left hemisphere, but it turns out not only the left hemisphere, that are involved in these kind of constituent elements of things that have to be done in order for us to communicate either orally or with written language. And we have to store the motor templates for how to make the words. That's in this part of the motor cortex called Broca's area. The knowing what those words sounds mean, okay, interpreting the sounds, Wernicke's area. Auditory cortex, arcuate fasciculus, so we know what we're saying as we're saying it. That's how we understand the words that we're emitting so we can, build on our sentences. Okay, so, yeah, these are the things that you need to be able to communicate. And, of course, principally, but not only, in the left hemisphere. And this is how they develop in a child from the age of 0 to 36 months. I want to show that. That's what I want to show. Isn't this fascinating? This is MRI imaging, right? And it's not the same, I don't know if it's the same child for 36 months, but unbelievable computerized modeling based upon the data okay, well, here's what's happening. Okay, we're starting to see some of that language, the sound recognition coming online. And now we're seeing the sound pattern recognition that is actually understanding language coming online. And we're seeing now some production, language production there. The templates of speech are starting to become formed so that they can be automatic, so you don't have to figure out, how do I do that? There was a time when you did, but then the motor template area of speech began developing, and you don't have to think about it as much. It becomes more automatic. Now we're 30 months of age, and we're seeing the constituent elements of this remarkable, complex network of connected regions of the brain that, working together, allow us to communicate using language. Now, what we don't have, because I couldn't find it, we don't have past 36 months, and I want to point out a couple of things to you. While you can recognize these structures, you can think of them as like nuggets, nodules, like functional processors that are a little bit specialized. To communicate, those processors have to interact with each other. Okay, so maybe you have a sound recognizer, but it's no good without a word knower. Okay, and you can see that there's clearly this arc-like connection here. But what will be different about an older brain is, you see how it's all kind of fuzzy and sinewy like that? Yeah, as that brain continues to, and you notice how it was cloudier earlier, right? And these things began kind of coalescing. So a brain, as it continues to mature, there'll be even less of that fuzziness. And the connections that you see between these areas would become brighter and stronger. And the areas themselves will become brighter and tighter. Okay? They would become smaller, more intense. The connections between them would be fewer but stronger. And that would be what a mature, clean-burning, efficient, automatic language system would look like. On the way to automaticity comes a kind of simplification. You could call it refinement. Okay, a refinement of the language system. In fact, that's not a bad word to use, because refinement is something that Montessorians talk about a lot. So our champion building the pink tower, yeah, okay, not that refined. Well, okay, the first 200 times you build the pink tower are the hard ones, because you develop refinement of motor control, you memorize the pattern sequence, you refine the visual sensory's ability to perceive the differences between the shapes. Your sensory motor map of the world, which is to say how heavy these various objects are and how heavy they are in relation to each other, that begins developing. And then it becomes smooth, and then it becomes automatic. And then at some point, it's not that interesting, which is maybe how it might be for a lot of adults. There's novelty to it, but it's, this isn't speaking to me. It's speaking to him because he's building it. No, actually, the language system, as I said, it's much more complicated than this. In fact, we now know that languages, while there are certainly damage to key areas in the brain, will definitely blow out specific elements of language. It turns out that language and language meaning is distributed widely throughout the brain. And in fact, when you are having language concepts that involve social interaction, there's distributed parts of the brain that are lighting up that in some way represent motor actions or concepts that pertain to social interaction. Talking about places or persons or time or outdoor or tactile, there are discrete regions that seem to be cued, triggered. And in fact, if we were to sit here today and had a little Q&A or a little experiential thing, we talk about what is your family going to do this weekend? Who's going to go first? And you'll say, oh, we got this thing planned. We're going to go here. We're going to do this thing. While you're talking about it, areas of the brain that are related to those concepts would begin to activate. They become pre-potentiated. And even as you sit there and think about how much stuff you got to get into your car tomorrow, yeah, in fact, you feel an anticipatory arousal happening because, in fact, your brain is teeing up those complex motor sequences that will need to be played back tomorrow for packing the car. And the thing is about being potentiated is they're activated. They're kind of low-level pre-activation. And stress is like that, isn't it? This is all going to go down. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this. Oh, man, that meeting is going to be murder, right? Okay, all that stuff. Why am I getting... I'm potentiating all these possible courses of action. And it takes a lot of energy to gear up for all those courses of action because you're not a human being, you're a human doing. And so just talking about something you're going to do, which is pretty much everything, your brain prepares for action. It prepares for action by pre-triggering the brain. You understand this, right? Okay? So, okay, we're talking about this complex language system. You're a sophisticated audience. You understand that the way you build that language system in your children is by having adult-child conversations. It's not just about exposure. It's about using language as a tool to get needs met. In fact, it really is about conducting sensory motor experiments with language, really, about using language in a goal-directed way. You know this stuff, and you probably know something about the achievement gap when it comes to simple vocabulary. Children from more disadvantaged backgrounds have vocabularies that are less than half the size of children from parents who are more higher educated and higher SES. It's one of the consequences of poverty. Parents with 2 or 3 jobs or stress or other issues that go along with poverty or low incomes, they don't have the time, maybe they don't have the attention. Maybe they don't know how important that interactive behavior is. Why are you talking to the baby? He doesn't understand you yet. Well, why are you talking to the baby? Because you want him to understand you. Because you got this in mind. Whether you have this visual or not, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the movements that you're going to engage in, the activities, the way you're going to use your body to interact with your child's body so that there will be a production of the experience of using language as a tool. Because you're not a human being, you're a human doing. And you're going to do these things with your children to help foster the growth of a sophisticated, complex language system. And there's only one way you do that. There's only one way. You have to engage them, help them become engaged in effortful, motivated, repeated, trial and error, experimental interactions with the environment as it pertains to using language to get your needs met. And you can do more of it, or you can do less of it. Okay? If you do less of it, there are predictable consequences that we just saw. So that's what he's doing. He's perfecting this. He's practicing. He's refining. That's what she's doing. It's universal principles. Universal principles. These are the things that you have to do to construct that sensory motor program, the sensory motor patterns stored in the neocortex. And you need those things in order to be able to, wherever you are in the world, whether it be high school, Google, graduate school, opening your own coffee shop, working on a production line in a factory, because you need those things to look around, figure out what needs to be done, and do it. That's what Google wants. They don't want your test score. They know it doesn't matter. So we've been hinting at this, and let's talk a little bit more about it now. Let's talk about the importance of efficiency. And there's your neocortex again, about the size of a napkin. These are the things that the neocortex does, just to remind you. And it wants to think so it can stop thinking, because the hard part is the thinking, the high energy expenditure. The slow, inefficient thing is the thinking, okay? So once it encounters a novel, new set of sensorial conditions with new, novel motor behavioral outputs, yeah, it will figure out what are the relevant salient sensorial features of the environment, and what are the appropriate adaptive behaviors to exhibit in the face of those senses. Okay, it sounds so analytical, but that's what your brain is doing. It's perceiving, it's selecting, it's executing, right? Okay? Okay, so I'm going to now give you a great example. This is a great example of, you can actually see the illustration of how this works. You ever played Tetris? Most people have played Tetris. Okay, so as it happens, Tetris is a brilliant example it's an example of a situation where you need to perceive the environment, evaluate sensorial information, anticipate outcomes, select an appropriate behavior, and take action. Fortunately, the universe of Tetris is pretty constrained, but this is what you're doing. This is how you get to be good at Tetris, by employing all of these things simultaneously. And that's what a brain looks like when it's never played Tetris before. So this is a brain that is inefficient at Tetris. It's using a tremendous amount of biological energy, very neuron activated. Everything's on board trying to solve Tetris, right? And there's a learning curve for Tetris from the same probably federally funded study showing the learning curve for Tetris. It takes about 45 days to become an expert Tetris player. And over that time, something happens. The activation pattern in the brain goes from this to this. So what's happened is this brain has become efficient at Tetris. In fact, it has developed from this to this. It's developed like a little muscle for Tetris. Just like you developed a little muscle for driving a car. And then it developed a little muscle for driving a stick shift car. Okay? Or for knowing how to sit in a chair. Or for that matter, how to sit. Okay? So, how to construct the pink tower. Okay? Now, it probably isn't always like that hugely activated, but the point is, this is the brain thinking. This is the brain not needing to think anymore. This is the brain that can play Tetris, drink a beer, eat a hamburger, try to impress some other brain with Tetris, right? That's what that brain is. Because those cognitive resources are freed up for higher and different, or at least not necessarily higher, but different behaviors. Because that brain has gone from here to here, it's developed automaticity. And that's what the neocortex needs. It needs you to train up all these automatic sensory motor couplings, all these procedures, so it doesn't have to think about it anymore. Because when it's about how to hold the pencil, it can't be about how to write poetry. That's how it works. It's got to do the pattern matching. It's got to have the motor responses tuned up so it just plays them back. It needs to be able to play back those sensory motor couplings. And that's what he's been working on. In fact, this is the second time, the next time, not the second time. This is the time after the one that we just saw. It takes him 35 seconds. Last time was 2 minutes 30. He's building automaticity. This is how you do it. If it were figure skating, he'd be on his way to the Olympics now. So the brain wants to build automaticity. There's great survival value in automaticity. Because the first time you have to figure it out, it takes lots of energy, and it's really slow. And if you had to figure it out every single time, we wouldn't have made it this far. Too much energy, too slow, too dangerous to be that slow. Yeah, I mean, you have to develop automaticity in the skill set necessary to do something like, isn't that weird? In a new situation, your first day on the job at Google, nothing is automated. But you have to look around, figure out what needs to be done, and do it. But what if you had this rich repertoire that you've constructed through endless engagement with the environment that began when you were like, I don't know, 2.5, where you began laying the foundational structures, the sort of hierarchical construction of these, one, tuned your senses so that you could trust your senses to identify the specific sensorial characteristics of this novel situation, and then refine the motor response under these conditions, and then took that and then added that, and yeah, soon you're writing neuropsychology reports. But you got to construct the whole tree all the way up to that. Because you don't need to, okay, you want to do this, you don't want to do this, right? There's no survival value in doing this, really. You want to have done it enough so that you can do it without having to think about it. That's what you want to do. And the only way you do it enough, the only way you don't have to think about it is if you develop automaticity and can do it without having to think about it. And it's, you need to build this auto-associative memory, which is happening all the time. I mean, you don't know that you're thinking about how to sit in a chair, but the association, the program for how to sit in the chair is magically there as you need it, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I'm going to move along because everything that moves, eats, and it could be eaten needs to be able to perceive the environment. And with automaticity, you don't have to evaluate the information. You don't have to anticipate the outcomes. You don't have to select the behavior because it's just reflexive. It's auto-associative. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about driving a car. It's all auto-associative. The programs are set. You can devote your energy and resources to something else because you've got automaticity. And it covers every aspect of life. From the first beginning stages of controlling the body, it's practice, 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 motivated practice to the point where it is auto-associative. You don't have to think about it. Here's the chair, I sit. Here's the door, I open it. Here's the food, I eat it. That's how you get to the Olympics. That's how you become an ER doctor. That's how you become some information worker, stock trader. It all is there. And it's all in the architecture necessary to construct those increasingly sophisticated sensory motor networks. We got to build the networks. We got to build the foundations. And there's an architecture that builds the foundations. You understand what I mean? That creates the new linkages, that creates the new novel, complex responses. And we know now from modern neuroscience research that involves things like fMRI, brain activation studies, that the way it's done is much more complicated than we used to think. In my field of neuropsychology, it really kind of came into its own as a discipline after the Second World War. And you know why? Because there was an abundance of World War II veterans who had various kinds of brain injuries. And we could see that when the bullet hit here and knocked out this divot, this was a behavioral consequence. And so you could develop tasks that would seemingly test that area. And then if somebody had a stroke, before we had imaging, we could figure out what went wrong, where the damage was, because we knew what that area does. But it turns out it's much more sophisticated than that. It's not really about divot analysis. It's about the interaction, the weight of evidence is now supported the view that cognition results from dynamic interactions of distributed brain areas, these large-scale cognitive networks. And all of this stuff is what's underneath the surface of the brain. The neocortex is just the surface, and there's this extraordinary 6 or more layers of interconnected neurons. But underneath that, there's more wiring. And you know where all that, you know what the termination of a lot of that wiring? It goes down to the motor system to execute the appropriate behavioral response given the sensorial input that's gone into the brain. So the brain can do the pattern matching that says, when traffic looks like this, it's okay to make that right turn into the next lane without thinking about it. The auto-associative, yeah, okay, I got it. Like sitting in the chair. Okay, so this is the architecture. This is the constructor of new sequences. And there seem to be a number of, this is what they look like, these fundamental networks. And there's even processing that happens in the spinal cord, okay, that's designed to construct, rehearse, practice, and store in the neocortex all these complex sensory motor patterns. I won't go into great depth, but there's something called the ventral attention network, which identifies objects and what they are used for. And there's a dorsal attention network, which controls spatial attention, shifting object location, and stores information about how objects are used. Isn't that weird? There's one network that is where it is, and there's an entirely different network that works with it about how to use it. What it is and what it's used for, and a different network about how to use it. Okay? And there's the frontal parietal network. This is our cognitive control center. This is our thinker, okay? When you encounter, when you set the cup down and it mysteriously drops through the tablecloth. I didn't see that coming. What's going on here? Boom, orienting. The brain detects an anomaly. It shifts. What's this? This is a novel situation. The frontal parietal network lights up. It engages the ventral and dorsal attention network. It uses visual processing to try to solve this novel problem. What are the sensorial aspects of this situation that I overlooked? Okay, so yeah, we have this interaction for the action control network. I'm not going to go into all these things, but the point is that there's a lot of this, the architecture, the constructor of the patterns that are stored is an active process that is engaged when it needs to be, when it comes across new or novel situations. And this architecture also, we're storing sensory motor patterns. We're developing the sensory motor map of the world. This is the constructor of the sensory motor map. This too has a maturational sequence to it, okay? So you remember the cortex developing, growing, okay? This develops too. You know how this develops? You know how this develops. It's the only way it develops. It's the only way it develops. Oh my God. Yeah, this is how it develops. Yeah, oh geez. Wow, it's kind of becoming boring at this point. Luckily, he's almost done. Yeah, because this is all there is. Now, okay, yeah, but what about observational learning? Yeah, okay, I'll watch how that kid did it, and you know what I'm going to do in my head? I'm going to simulate it. That's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to do it, and I'll still have to figure it out, but maybe not quite as hard, because it turns out I can simulate activity in my brain. In fact, yeah, you can literally sit in a chair and practice doing shots on the basketball hoop, and yeah, you'll get better through simulation. Because you know what's happening when you're simulating? All those little muscles are going twitch, 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 twitch. Link, 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 link. That's how you do it? Yeah, just like that. Yeah, okay, good. Just like that. That's how you do it, okay? Yeah, because I'm simulating, I'm developing linkages, and when I get my hands on the ball, I've done some practicing already. But the simulation actually is an effortful, motivated, repeated trial and error experimental interaction with the environment. There's a great saying in this field, cognition is movement without action. That's what you're doing, a lot of movement without action. Because you're not a human being, you're a human doing. Action is inherent to being a human being. Activity is inherent. Why do you have a brain? You have a brain because you got a body that can move. And everything that's got a body that can move is to be able to move to eat, move to escape, or decide when or where to stop moving. Okay, so should we talk about Montessori? Geez, I don't know, it might be a good idea, an hour and 18 minutes into the lecture. Well, we got about 15 minutes left. Now, I bet if you have spent time in a Montessori classroom, you're maybe building some connections here, are you? And you think about that Montessori curriculum, which I flashed up a couple of times. And so it turns out that it's not about being a janitor. Oh, that was about this movement business. And in fact, it wasn't just about developing, the sensory motor patterns necessary for independent living skills. I bet some adolescents who could use some of that. Okay? So it's not just about knowing how to clean up after yourself and how to set a table and how to, do all those things that you see. No, because it's about tuning the system that's the constructor, giving the constructor practice. And how do we know that it's engaging in the kind of activity? What can we see when the constructor is constructing, when the constructor is getting its work out? Okay? Constructor is building, what is the constructor doing? Again, it's so fundamental. Identify the relevant sensorial features of the environment in this novel situation that I'm trying to figure out. And select, sequence, rehearse, and mate the two, the sensory with the motor. That's everything, okay? That is everything. You do enough of that at enough levels, then you're writing neuropsychology reports. That's right. Or whatever it is that you do in your field of practice. What does the constructor look like when it's constructing? Well, holy smokes, did Montessori have this nailed? She had it nailed because she writes a lot about, and you Montessori teachers have learned a lot about, the importance of concentration. Fundamental to Montessori. What does a constructor look like when it's constructing? This is what it looks like. It's Thinking. Yeah, that's the thinking. The thinking so that it can stop thinking. The thinking so that it can improve its survival probabilities by having this program nailed down, so it doesn't have to think about it the next time it encounters it. So that's the frontal parietal network engaged. It's engaged in effortful cognitive tasks when rules or information must be utilized to guide behavior. Also, because different people write in different ways, the cognitive control, the task positive. It's the thing that's lit up when you're trying to do something, okay? Not when you're thinking about something, not when you're daydreaming. That's a different network that's also very interesting. But this is when you're trying to figure out how to do something, either actively or, to be fair, if you're simulating it. It's the frontal parietal network. And Montessori knew all about this without knowing anything about it. She knew all about what it had to do and how to help it without knowing anything about its architecture. Concentration is the key that opens up to the child the latent treasures within him. You know, you get used to reading these things from Montessori and you think, wow, that's really beautiful. I wonder what that means. What it means is, it is through the mechanism of concentration that the constructor constructs the sensory motor patterns necessary to skillfully and adaptively engage in the world. This is a novel sensorial thing. Okay, what are the relevant features? What are the appropriate behaviors? Linking them together. That's the constructor. That's what's happening. Well, there's other perspectives on concentration, but this is one of the things that's happening in concentration. And yeah, so why does it open up latent treasures? Because that's how you develop capacity, capability. That's how you develop the capability to skillfully engage and interact with the world, by building these structures, by linking them together into more complex structures. The first essential for the child's development is concentration. It lays a whole basis for his character and social behavior. Once you've got there, the constructor is online and ready for action. And like everything else, it's got to build itself. How does the constructor build itself? It's not a hard question now, by constructing. Well, I mean, a 2-year-old can't build the pink tower. That's right. So the pink tower is not the thing for the 2-year-old. Well, they will interact with it. They'll eat it or something like that, right? They'll interact with it in a way that so there's a different thing that is a 2-year-old's version of a constructor. Let's bang the pots together. That's a good start, you know, once we're making progress. Hey, agency, look what I can do. Bang, that was loud. Mom, get this. Bang, that was really loud. I'm experiencing agency. I can cause a thing. I can cause people to get upset. But at least I caused it. Okay? So yeah, the constructor, the 2-year-old version of the constructor, it's kind of primitive. That's right. It's mastering on controlling the body and causing an effect in the world. Okay. The result of concentration is an awakened social sense, because the constructor is starting to build the sensory motor complexes that are the foundation of skillful interaction with the world, engagement in the social world. The constructor is constructing the being, the person. Okay? An awakened social sense. The teacher should be prepared for what follows. To the little newborn hearts, she will be a creature beloved. What must it be like to encounter a situation where day after day, this beatific figure continues to create conditions that allow me to follow nature's design, to engage in the activities that my developing nervous system is craving, so that I can construct myself. Why do humans construct themselves? It's just how we're built. It's nature's design. If we create conditions that allow that nervous system, that child, right, that self, to build itself, well, we're making progress toward autonomous, independent moral agency. And I'm willing to aim for that. And there's a mechanism, an interesting piece of work, freely chosen, which has a virtue of inducing concentration rather than fatigue, adds to the child's energies and mental capacities, and leads him to self-mastery. There's nothing greater than going deep on a project that you love, that you can do, that is challenging but not impossible, and then coming up for air 3 hours later and saying, oh God, I am alive. I am on the earth. I am in the world, you know? It's a funny feeling. It's gratifying. It's like self-realizing. What's it like to self-realize? You know, what's the 3-year-old version of self-realizing, or the 6-year-old, or the 9-year-old? To bring all your capacities to bear. And it's decoded. Interesting piece of work. Yeah, freely chosen. Oh, because it's got to be if today was the day that the Pink Tower spoke to him and he got to do it, what's his motivation level? Why is it speaking to him? Because there's something here for him, right? He's motivated. He wants to do it. He's working hard on it. Yeah, well, I know. I'm not used to seeing children working that hard. Yeah, mostly because you're assigning them things. What if the child gets to hear this little voice of the soul saying, ooh, this is interesting. Why is that interesting? We don't know, but it's interesting today. Okay, so motivated. Yeah, you never bring your A game to a task you don't care about. But man, if it's your thing, yeah, everything goes there. Everything comes on board. The great principle which brings success to the teacher is this: as soon as concentration has begun, act as if the child does not exist. Naturally, one can see what he's doing with a quick glance, but without his being aware of it. Because what we don't want is for him to think about what you're thinking about what he's doing. We want his constructor at work. We want his selective attention and focus. And you know how it is to have someone looking over your shoulder. For whatever reason, you don't want their little voice on your shoulder. It distracts you. It distracts you, and it distracts them. And this is where you parents should really take a good, hard look at yourself and your bizarre, irrational, and unnatural urge to praise your children for breathing, okay? Because if they're doing it, and if they're loving it, and if they're into it, are you really that important and that powerful that if you say, good job, that they're going to do it better, harder, longer, or faster? No. They're into it. They're into it. Don't distract them with your point of view, with your, well, remember the grades, right? As soon as there's an evaluative feedback, A, B, C, growth stops. That kind of good job, evaluative feedback, is not helpful to the developing brain. It wants to develop. It's going to do this anyway. Yeah, maybe. What does a coach do? A coach says, that's how you do it. Now move your hand a little closer. That's it. See? You feel that? Now you got some real power on it. That's how you do that. That's it. Not good job. It's that's how you do it. That's coaching. That's not praise. Praise is of no use. It's not a useful source of feedback. Unless it is, good job, that's exactly how you do it. Do you feel the difference now? Do you see how that works? Okay, repeat it, right? Now repeat it over and over. Praise, help, or even a look may be enough to interrupt him or destroy the activity. It seems a strange thing to say, but this can happen even if the child merely becomes aware of being watched. And you know why. After all, we too sometimes feel unable to go on working if someone comes to see what we're doing. Yeah, I don't need to read this to you. You can read it yourself. Because the praise has no utility, adds no value to engaging in this process. Because the brain wants to do these things. It wants to master. It wants to perceive the environment, evaluate information, anticipate outcomes, select appropriate behavior, and take action. This is survival. This is how brains build those sensory motor patterns that are the foundation of skillful and adaptive engagement with the world. Okay, so we're almost done. You all with me so far? Okay, wrapping it up here. Oh, timing is great. So we're building sensory motor couplings. That's what we're trying to build, which means building automaticity. And the only way we build automaticity is by practice, and that's how we construct this predictive sensory motor model of the world. That's how we do it. That's what he's doing. We saw him. That's what this guy's doing. This guy's in, sorry, I need the audio. That's what this guy's doing in China. He's constructing his sensory motor map of the world. I'm not going to play the audio, you don't need to hear it, but yeah, he's matching sounds, developing his language system, and is he into it? Yeah, he's into it. He's conducting experimental interactions with regard to his perception of sound. Okay, yeah, because that's fundamental. He's in China. Your children are here. Same brain, same fundamental developmental process. And if you get these opportunities like he's getting here, or like your children are getting here, more practice. More practice. How do you build a sensory motor map of the world? Got to build it. Got to do it. How do you build a constructor? Like any muscle, by using it. And there's elementary, and I was talking more about the construction of the brain today, but same features are present in the elementary environment. It's at a higher level of abstraction. Now it's applying. It's refining those sensory motor structures. Again, okay, now we're writing poetry, okay? And the reason we can write poetry, well, we can write poetry already, but the reason we're writing poetry and doing it without having to think about the mechanics of it is because we got the mechanics handled. That part's been done. The reading part has been done. The language part has been done. Yeah. Now we're learning things too, but we're applying that finely tuned machine to the act of exploring, learning, understanding, researching the world. So there's the elementary environment. And here's an example from an adolescent program where they were like building a log cabin. Okay, what could they possibly be learning here? Nothing that will appear on any test. But when the guy at Google says, tell me about a time when you solved an analytically difficult problem, you can say, wow, I've done a few of those in my day. What would I want to tell you about? Well, I can tell you what was going on. I like that term, analytically difficult. Let me tell you about the time we built the log cabin at my school. Yeah. Oh, interesting. You built a log cabin. Yeah. What was difficult about that? Oh, what wasn't difficult about that? I had Jonathan on my crew, okay? But I mean, that's a story. That's a story that's going to tell that person something about how you think. And that, this doesn't appear on a test, but it's going to appear in life, some version of that later. The first log cabin is the hard one. But in doing those things, you're developing this by practice, by repetition, by experimental interactions. You're constructing the constructor. And the thing about having a well-constructed constructor is when we talk about the constructor, what we're kind of talking about? What we're kind of talking about? We're talking about IQ, friends. That's what we're talking about. And the more mature the constructor, at least at some age levels, right? The more mature the constructor, the better it is at solving novel problems. Why wouldn't it be? Because that's the thing that does the solving, okay? It discerns the relevant sensorial features of this novel problem-solving situation and determines the appropriate behavioral response. Check D, okay? Yeah, central executive, the constructor, different languages, different words that people use for these things. It's related to the maturation. This is between network segregation, which means that everything's fuzzy, right? Everything's fuzzy. And with practice, with experience, with maturation, they become more efficient, they become more segregated, they become more discrete. So one version of what is IQ, it's the ability to construct new sensory motor couplings. That's one version of IQ, and it's a pretty good definition of it. How good a problem solver are you? How good is your constructor? Now, we see the benefits of it in Montessori, it turns out. Yeah. We see the benefits of a good constructor. In fact, we see the consequences of a well-developing constructor having lots of experiences building sensory motor patterns as they pertain to all aspects of the environment. This was published in the journal Science, Angeline Lillard's famous classic 2006 study. You see that little bar that was out? Let's look at that bar. Let's look at that more closely. Randomized assignment to condition. So there, okay? Experimental and control groups. Lottery system, Milwaukee Public Schools, lottery winners got to go to the Montessori school, lottery losers went to other schools. So they could compare with randomized assignment to condition. Okay, these are early, Woodcock-Johnson is a widely used achievement test. Okay, so letter word identification, word attack or decoding, applied math, mathematical reasoning skills. The difference is almost half a standard deviation. Now, these are children in the regular education world, right? Milwaukee Public School children. The typical effect size in education interventions is about 1/4 of a standard deviation. Okay, like the best you can do is gain about 1/4. It seems so small, seriously. A highly effective educational intervention, 0.25 of a standard deviation, almost 0.5. In some cases, more than 0.5. Montessori versus conventional. Executive functioning, which we'll talk about in the Q&A if you want to. Social cognition, references to justice when solving social problem vignettes, okay? Positive shared play during unstructured time on the playground. And yeah, the only one they're lower on is by quite a bit, and that was observation of ambiguous rough play on the playground. And you know what that looks like. Those boys are either laughing or they're crying. They're either fighting or they're playing. We're not sure what's going on here, and they're not either, okay? That's what that is. Now, many of these differences persist to age 12. You'll be relieved to hear that even children in conventional education environments learn how to read and do math, okay? But what we see is that the sophistication of sentence structures continues. Because when it's not about how to hold the pencil, it can be about how to write poetry starting pretty early. So they have more sophisticated sentences, greater creativity in a story writing task, more positive social strategies for solving problems with peers, and a greater sense of their school as a community. Yeah, that's what you get from Montessori. And you know, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Because think of the extraordinary number of practice opportunities, well, at everything you see here and here. We have a mixed age environment. There's new children here, and there's the old pros. Let me show you the ropes there, kid. Because I know everything about this environment. And now next year, I know nothing about this environment. But the older kids, they were here once. And they know. Okay, got it. When my daughter was a Montessori child, and for years after, she didn't care how old that child was. She played with the little kid next door. She played with the big kid next door. She fit in everywhere because she wasn't thinking about that kind of hierarchy. Okay? Now we can look at some other stuff. Yeah, okay, so the consequences of building all these sensory motor couplings and the consequences of developing all the things that you get with a sophisticated constructor. Now here's the thing, okay? So there's other outcomes that we can talk about that have been just published. And Kevin has copies of like the latest research. And you also subscribe to white paper press at this school. So you'll get literature reviews of all these key areas that will be distributed to you as they come along. I'm basically done. I just want to end with a couple of things. So yeah, you want these outcomes? Yeah, of course you do. You want these outcomes? Of course you do. You know, there's this great line in the research about parents from more highly educated, higher socioeconomic strata, right, okay? There's a term that I came across once that has stayed with me. Parents from high SES backgrounds are overwhelmingly preoccupied with the cognitive development of their children. Does that sound about right? Yeah, okay. But you think that means grades. And if you can think a little bit past that, you know what it means. It means something about, well, that's why if you're on top of your game, they're pouring the milk and not you, right? Okay. So if you're on top of your game, you're creating conditions that are not that different from what they get at school, which is practice opportunities. Okay, so the whole point, I think you get it, we want to construct these sensory motor couplings. We want to construct a constructor, the seat of intelligence and problem solving, and the only way you do it is with this, right? It's the only way. There's nothing ever like this for creating those opportunities. Orders of magnitude difference in the number of practice opportunities between what happens at this school and a conventional school. Orders of magnitude. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're doing education for life. That's what this is for. That's what Montessori did. She had it all figured out. We keep confirming that. Thanks for listening.
Who's got something on their mind to ask a question? I would say it's hard to ask the first question, but we're Montessorians, so we're new Montessorians, so we'll start with you.
So you spent a lot of the time talking about the neocortex.
Yeah.
And referring a lot to what Google wants. But it feels to me after this that it's really the constructor that they're looking for, a well-developed constructor. The well-developed neocortex is icing on the cake, because you might have somebody who can hit the ground running, but the constructor is ultimately what's going to drive success. Am I misinterpreting?
No, I think that you're right. And this is a position that I used to talk more or less about the constructor. But now I realize, though, that's kind of right. Not wrong. It's not wrong. But anybody had to run a staff meeting in their career? Okay. What if you did your first staff meeting about the log cabin, so that by the time you got to Google, you had that neocortex that had already figured out how to run a staff meeting. So and this is the important thing to understand, too. If it was only about real-time, immediate problem solving, then it would only be about the constructor. But what is wisdom? Okay, wisdom is application of accumulated experience, relevant application of accumulated experience in the here and now. And you want, I mean, yeah, they want the constructor, but they want wise constructors. Yeah, and well, it turns out, yeah, wow. I mean, I'm not doing that for you, but it's like, oh my God, yeah, because there are things to know. Ha! There are things to know. Yeah, that's right. But actually, there are things to know to bring to bear in. I mean, like, I would not want to see a neuropsychologist who had never studied neuropsychology and like taken college tests and, yeah, because there are things to know. And so they're inextricably interrelated. And in fact, in the theory of intelligence, you have two kinds. You have the constructive intelligence and you have the knowledge gained intelligence. They call it crystallized in fluid, but that's not a good way to describe it. But it's like eductive and reproductive, okay? Eductive is figure out, discern the constructor, identify the relevant, yeah, I don't want to go on and on about the educe versus reproduce. We need both. It's fundamental. Yeah. So good to have a good constructor, but a constructor that's been built by constructing things, yeah, you want those things too. Thank you.
Jess?
So I think oftentimes when we hear something like this, we're thinking, okay, we need to provide more opportunities for practice.
Yeah.
We've got to have more opportunities for effortful engagement and practicing these things. And I think sometimes that leads us to thinking, I need to add more structure. Maybe tutoring would be a good choice, or all these types of things. So I'm kind of wondering if you could speak to also the benefits, perhaps from your viewpoint of letting our children just be.
Letting them just be. Boy, what's that like in this modern age? Well, okay, so that's a really good, that's an excellent question. And I'm going to differentiate between tutoring and coaching, okay? Because I'm going to come down on the side of tutoring as coaching. And when it's effective tutoring, it is coaching. Because what we want is we want to guide, and Montessorians do this with the materials too. They'll see a child who keeps missing something, right? What do they call that when you point out there's a thing that you'll do to maybe repeat a presentation. Maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe I'm mistaken about this. What is it? Repeat a presentation. Yeah, you might repeat a presentation so that, because they maybe missed an essential element the first time, so you might repeat it. And you know what's interesting is that the inclination is not to say, well, let me do it again and say, see? You see this part here? I think you might have missed that. Okay. And when I was first getting close to Montessori, it almost seemed like, wow, they really don't want to do that. They really don't want to, like, because what that is, that's about telling, that's a version of they're telling them the right answer. Okay? And if you're going to build a constructor, you don't want to ever tell them the right answer, right? You want to create conditions that allow them to ding, that's the connection, boom, I constructed it. So, okay, so what's the purpose of tutoring? Well, we want it to be coaching because we want it to help that brain that's having trouble mastering phonology to get more and more concentrated and more targeted practice opportunities. We want to, see, but what we're doing. For phonology, we're creating practice, more and carefully targeted practice opportunities. Yeah. Now, what a lot of parents will think is that tutoring is going to be about again, any tutoring, even if it's like history subject, right? If you're like in a regular school and tutoring on history, it's just repetition. It's just more practice. Now, we can go overboard with these things, and we can God help us now, if you're going to go home and say, well, we got to get that kid constructing all the time. We got to, this is kind of what you're speaking to. Sorry, I think I deviated for a moment, but well, no, they don't need to be constructing all the time because one of the things that we're losing in this modern age is we're losing unstructured play, kid time, unsupervised, uncurated time. And what are they doing during, there's this fabulous study that it was, was in one of the Carolinas, maybe, I don't know if it was North Carolina. I have it, but I'm not going to look for it. Unbelievable. They were examining the economic benefits of reducing the school week to 4 days and concerned about the possible learning consequences of shifting to a 4-day week. And this is conventional schooling oriented around what sort of outcomes? Test scores, right? So they did the study. They reduced it to a 4-day week. Scores went up. Wow, wow. So what were they, well, whatever they were doing that day that they weren't at school, they were probably doing things that help develop the constructor, to use that language that I'm using tonight. Yeah, because free play is not mindless play. In fact, free play is almost certainly going to be some kind of kid version of goal-directed play. My daughter used to dig holes and bury things in the backyard. I don't know why she did that, but you know, it was weird. But it was goal-oriented, it was goal-directed, and I think that there was I dug stuff too. Maybe we all did. Why? Why do we want to dig when we're 5? What are we digging for? What is the reason for that? We don't know, but it seems kind of universal. So that free play was her engaging in an internally motivated thing. Yeah, thank you for that question, yeah. I'm sorry, I think I kind of wandered off, but I think I came back to where we want to be.
Most of your lecture today has been on children and how their brain development and how talking about how children's brain development and talking about how important it is in schools to get their brains to start developing this way.
Yeah.
Is it possible after primary and secondary education when you're older to reformat your brain sort of and to retrain it to develop this way?
Well, okay, so this is actually another excellent question. Must be a Montessori child, yeah. Well, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that it's not that we shape the brain into doing something different, but I think that when we do something different from the experience that you had, we're not giving it what it needs. Okay, so this is how your brain is no matter what kind of school you had, and the point that I'm making is that these early practice opportunities seem, well, I didn't talk about kind of windows of opportunity and things like that, but this is how your brain learns everything. So if you're a 40, you guys are 40. You could take up ballroom dancing. You could take up ballroom dancing. And the way that you would develop the skills of a ballroom dancer are exactly this way. And the thing is that the reason why most people start ballroom dance lessons and stop, because it is hard, okay? It is really hard. You're doing a kind of, you haven't done this sensory motor sequencing crap for decades, right? You know? And now it's like, oh my God, I cannot control my body. It's moving in directions that I'm not aware. I thought I was going left. You're going left. It's a crazy, weird feeling. It's really frustrating because it's hard. But you could, and in doing so, you would be kind of spinning up some parts of your constructor that had to do with sensory motor couplings and novel, you got to, I mean, there's no escaping it. You have to string together novel behavioral sequences that are sensorially cued. You want to add something to that? Yeah.
Just picking up on that idea, I was just thinking as you were talking about this concept of flow, which I'm sure you've
Oh, I'm
heard
glad
of.
you mentioned that. Man, this is like the best Q&A ever. Yeah, okay. Well, so what is flow?
Well,
You want to say something about that? It sounds like you know something about that.
just a little bit. I mean, it seems like what we're all going for, right? It's that when you are engaged, fully engaged, when you are challenged, but just enough that you can meet the challenge,
Yeah.
and you kind of lose yourself
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah.
And I mean, that's when everybody's sort of optimized, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what adults are going for. It sounds like, in a way, the Montessori approach kind of optimizes that at each stage, or is trying to.
Yeah, there's some interesting discussion around flow in Montessori, because I think that there's a more nuanced view of concentration, because I think it's not incorrect that concentration is what it looks like when the constructor is constructing, but it also looks like that when the constructor is not really constructing, in fact, when the orchestra is playing, okay? But the orchestra, I'm going to stretch this analogy to its absolute limits, okay? But let's talk about an orchestra. Lots of different parts, lots of different musicians. Everyone has to master their instrument, and they have to master their instrument and the piece of music to the point of automaticity, right? So at its best, they really don't even need the music. They even don't even need the music, because they got and it's like the figure skating thing, not to stretch into other analogies, but yeah, I mean, figure skating, you're not learning your moves at the Olympics. They're mastered, they're nailed. You just gotta let them play. And so the orchestra has lots of musicians who are playing lots of parts who have to work together harmoniously, and there is still a conductor who's kind of like, and this is where it breaks down, because they're not actually in real time selecting what passage to play, right? Okay, There's a better analogy. There I went down. Oh, God, I tried to think about it. Wrong analogy. But the point is that flow, there's still a conductor, I guess, okay? And it's selecting programs. What is it? A DJ. Ah, well done. Thank you for that. It's a DJ reading the mood, figuring out what's the right next sequence. Yeah, what's the right next sequence? And really a much better analogy is talking about playing tennis, where, in fact, people talk about experiencing flow. But you're not working on your backhand during a flow experience. That's, okay, let's just get really technical. That's maybe a concentration experience, right? When you're working on your backhand over and over. Deliberate practice. That's not flow. The benefits of deliberate practice are that you've tuned up all these complex sensory motor programs, and when you're in flow, it's like, oh man, I'm just backhand, I'm just forehand, I'm not thinking about how to do it, I'm thinking about which one to run. I'm in real time, smoothly selecting, okay? And so you only get that if you've really got the programs built. If you have to work on your backhand in the midst of a match, you'll lose the match. So that's the analogy I want to make. And I think it's fair to say that they're both a kind of concentration. But there's a different underlying, there's something different underlying it. And so I think that what we're seeing in Montessori, others have said maybe something different, that, oh, look, they're all in flow. Well, yeah, they're in flow when they're playing back the pink tower because it feels good and they know how this works. But it's a lower level of flow, maybe. Yeah, we're potentiating flow with expertise, with automaticity. Let's hear a couple more people. 2 more questions, and then maybe we should pack it in. Unless there's a really good third one. But this has been a great Q&A, so let's keep our flow going.
I've spent most of my working career working with kids that didn't develop typically.
Yeah.
So my question was, how does that...
How is it reflected in all this?
Exactly. Does
Yeah.
this transpire to them and benefit them in the same way?
Well, it turns out that you're probably well aware that children, special needs children of almost any sort, there are distortions in their sensory motor development, right? And so what we want to do is we want interventions that are, and you're more expert on this than I am, okay? But what I'm going to say is that some of these cognitive networks, the constructor, I'm going to talk about 2 of them, the constructor and the contemplator. Like when you're looking out the window on the bus and you're not thinking about anything, you're just daydreaming, that's a whole different network that's doing that compared to the constructor. And I think you understand, daydreaming is different from constructing. Now, you could be simulating constructive activity, well, then you're not daydreaming. Are you all with me? Okay, so let's call them the constructor and the daydreamer. In infancy, they're not differentiated, but through and this is kind of obligatory. Your brain this by virtue of living and interacting in the world, this is something the brain wants to do. It wants for these different cognitive networks to evolve, and based upon experience, but also based on other things, there's going to be some variation in how they evolve. It's pretty fundamental, so, the bar is low for seeing the constructor appear, right? But just how good is that constructor going to be? Now, in all kinds of, like in schizophrenia, in autism, in ADHD, in depression, there's distortions in the operation or even the development of the neurologic structures that are these distinct networks. And so we can get a little bit off the track by overdoing the sensory motor aspect of these things, but it doesn't mean that it's a wrong track. It's just that there's a lot of things that have been cooked up that have been focusing on the sensory motor, like probably balancing. Okay, well, that's a vestibular thing but that's probably not going to help you be a better reader, okay? So there are interventions that are trying to address and help mature these elements of the nervous system. I don't think that you can let's just tune up that one thing, because everything is happening all the time. There are these specializing regions. So children who are special needs to varying degrees, I'll go out on a limb, almost certainly show some disturbance or distortion in the construction of some of these neurological networks. I read the names of them, okay? And so kind of a more modern take on, developmental neuropsychology, my field, pediatric neuropsychology, is beginning to understand that we are tracking the evolution of not tasks, okay? We give tests, which are tasks, which tap the brain, but almost nothing. You can't just tap one thing. And likewise, you can't do an intervention that just is trying to tune up the, frontal parietal network. In fact, by definition, the frontal parietal network, when it's engaged in a goal-directed activity, is using the dorsal and ventral attention networks, So, I mean, you can't selectively tune something, and you wouldn't want to do that anyway, because what you really want to tune is behavioral control, meaningful, useful interaction with the world, which requires all this stuff. So did everybody get that? Are you sure? Yeah. So, I mean, fundamentally, there are distortions in the development of these systems, and I would say they're almost certainly nearly universal in children who have special needs, and the worse their difficulties, probably the more you see these frank distortions. And understanding this, as I understand it, not my area of expertise, beginning to really guide some of our thinking about appropriate intervention. For starters, it explains why a lot of things that people in my line of work would call kind of sham interventions, it explains why they're shams. Like, how many examples do we have of something like, Dr. Smith's deionized water cures all ails, you know what I mean? There are lots of versions of that in OT and all that whole world of intervention. Yeah, your child's developmental reading problem is almost certainly got nothing to do with his balance problem. But it's not uncommon that a developmental issue has manifestations that can also be seen in motor coordination, right? And we would say that in ADHD, poor handwriting, poor fine motor control is, for all intents and purposes, universal. And why wouldn't it be? Because ADHD involves a part of the descending motor system called the basal ganglia, which has to do with motor regulation. Oh my God. So no wonder there's a fine motor implication in ADHD. Oh, they're not related, are they? One's about attention, one's about writing. Yeah, except behavioral inhibition, heavy lifting by the basal ganglia, is part of the descending motor system. Yeah, to stop your behavior. Oh, to gate behavior, which is also involved in writing. Oh, okay. Once you start thinking in terms of networks, you can see how these things kind of link together and why, it turns out, for ADHD, there is real benefit in a physical coordinative activity, which is strengthening motor control. Well, wait a minute. Why do we need motor control if we're talking about poor attention? Yeah, well, friends, watch the Montessori classroom. Self-control begins with controlling the self, right? Okay? So there's interesting research showing that coordinated physical exercise, probably ballroom dancing, taekwondo, things like that. Exercises like throwing a big ball in one hand and a small ball in the other while you're like on a rotating platform, okay? It seems so sensory motor, but it's a complex motor activity that requires concentrated effort and coordination of movement, which is exercising motor control systems in the brain, which is building those things that are implicated in hyperactive impulsive version of ADHD. You got it? And you do a lot of motor things that don't really do what they think they're doing. So there's the problem. That was really ridiculously long and detailed, but
That's your last one. That's your best. Let's give him one. Is there one more good one that he could end on? That
it's
wasn't
been
your
a great
best.
night for questions. Let's get one more from somebody. Yeah. Okay.
Talking about automaticity, and this is great not to have to think and just do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how about when the system sort of goes awry and you develop bad habits, even as far as...
Well, let's talk about the psychotherapeutic interventions for people who have, bad habits of interacting with others. Yeah. So what we have is, I'll just put it here for example. So bad habits for dealing with other people. That's a good example of automaticity, the wrong automatic response. So somebody raises their voice, I've got a history of abuse, and I'm suddenly overreacting, and I'm ready to lash out. We see this happen in schools, okay? So the trouble is that the pre-potentiated response is a defensive or threat reaction response. And what we need to do is we need to build a different kind of a response. Okay, so we have to practice a more adaptive response, try to engage in sort of therapeutic interventions that help Jonathan stay present in the face of his misperceived threat, okay? Yeah, and because these are behavioral sequences that are trained up, yes, absolutely. We have to, or sometimes one trial training, that's what PTSD is, right? One trial conditioning. Yeah, so effective interventions involve practice. When I used to do treatment I used to do cognitive behavioral therapy for panic disorder, which is a brilliant example of this. People who have panic attacks, they universally, why did you have a panic attack? I thought I was dying. Why did you think you were dying? My heart was racing out of control. I didn't know what was. My dad dropped dead at 50. I'm 49. It's my turn next. Why is my heart beating so fast? Okay, well, yeah, so, and how many times have you been to the ER? It's been 8 times now. They still can't find anything. This might be a clue, okay? So you, sir, have a cued response to probably a physically benign thing, because every once in a while, everybody's heart skips a beat. Or if you've been sitting down and now you suddenly stand up and you feel a little woozy. That happened to me today. Did it happen to you? Probably. Did you notice it? No, because that wasn't a cue, right? It didn't trigger you. So the practice of developing new habits with somebody who has panic disorder is that every time they think they're having a heart attack, how many times? Maybe it's this time. Well, okay, what else could it be? So we teach them what the physiology of what they're experiencing is. We show them that, and if this were an emergency situation, yeah, that would be the appropriate response. Adrenaline, increased symptoms, panic, run out of the room, head to the hospital, if it were that. But I think we're developing some evidence here that it's not that. But isn't it interesting how your mind reads it as that, and then your mind does cause the physical cue of adrenaline, increase in symptoms, and off we go to the races, right? So the treatment for panic disorder is information, learning how to do symptom control, and then practice. People who are fully trained up on anxiety and panic symptom management, they still need to practice. They go out there in the world, I had 3 this week. Yeah, but duh, don't you know how to manage it? Well, yeah, I do, except when I'm having one. Yeah, right? Okay. But I'm getting better at seeing it as it's beginning so that I can do my breathing and relaxation. But yeah, so every behavioral problem that you're describing, wrong cues. That's a wrong cue. And that's well trained, okay? First Chinese traces, it's got to be this. So same with behavioral problems, same with everything that we want. If it comes down to we want a different, more adaptive behavior instead of the one that has been learned and is thus now pre-potentiated by this sensorial environment, okay, this set of conditions, we have to retrain. Yeah, we have to train a new behavior. Another great question. I think that's a very nice example. That's a very nice example where we have, I mean, yeah. And I'm going to say that I think it's a reasonable analogy, okay? Because we're talking about really, addiction, stimulus, cued response, physiologic arousal, knowing full well that if I get that thing into me, then I'll feel better, right? Okay. So it's still a pattern. So I'll go with pattern. Yeah. You want to say something?
There's so many children now in this country who have anxiety.
Yeah.
At younger and younger ages.
Yeah, why do you suppose that is? You think it says something?
I have my
You've been around a little longer than, you've been in this school how long?
26 years.
So you've seen a couple of generations of parents come through. What are these knuckleheads doing wrong that they're producing such anxious children?
I think it might have something to do with whenever you say that they're so concerned about cognitive growth and cognitive abilities. And
Okay, they're pushing too hard? Or they're...
yeah, I would say pushing too hard, expecting too hard, doing too many things, not having downtime.
That's an interesting observation. I think there's one of the things that people who've been around, as you've been around, one of the things that comes up a lot is that, most child activity these days is kind of curated, isn't it? Isn't that, we are petrified to send the kid out to the backyard and come back before dinner. And if we don't know where they are, we're scared. And okay, yeah, that's too bad. Part of the reason we're scared was the milk carton kids from the 80s. It turns out that the vast majority of those children were custody disputes where somebody ran off with the kid. Not that there was a stranger abduction. That's very rare, and it does happen. But it's very rare. But anytime it does happen, we all hear about it. So I think we're more scared than we need to be. And parents also have this feeling that they need to be the primary agent of creating, of curating these opportunities. You like that? Yeah, keeping them entertained. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for this, and it's easy to say blame the parents, but yeah, mostly it's blame the parents. Sure, why not? Yeah. Say some more about that.
That we're constantly worried we're not doing enough, that we're not good enough, that it's our fault that our children are failing at something.
Yeah.
There's a constant pressure to be better, so we don't really know how to be better.
As parents, you mean, or more generally? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. That's it. I'll say this, given that your children are in an environment where they have orders of magnitude more practice opportunities, compared to any other setting. I mean, who made the kiln? Who made the forge? Where were we looking at? Where's Rhea? What was that thing, the thing inside the fume hood?
Junior high forge. They were making.
Junior high,
they
yeah.
made a forge.
They made a forge. Whatever, right, okay? So if you're in a school where somebody's making a forge, relax, okay? You can relax. Because everybody's doing something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be glib. It's easy to be glib about this stuff. But yeah, that's part of the problem of the modern age is that, one, we actually think that if we don't praise, we've missed an opportunity. No, you haven't. You've ruined an opportunity. Oh, ouch, yeah. What if I just say, how about pretty good job? No, don't say anything. It's so hard not to do that because, especially if there's other adults around, and the way you say it, good job, Jonathan. I really like the way you're coloring. You know, God, did you see what I just did? That was a joke. Okay, now you're going to judge me. Yeah, okay, yeah. You even say it with a self-perception of virtue, don't you? Because you know other adults are watching and you're demonstrating good parenting, except that's not good parenting. That's conventional parenting. People go to a Montessori school. Why would you want to do something conventional? What's conventional is to let the child, allow them to. Seriously, though, I had this in a dream. We'll end on this little story. Yeah, I mean, like you sometimes dream about the things that you spend all your time thinking about. Okay, I had this remarkable dream. It was lucid, almost a lucid dream, and it was like I had this realization that when somebody is concentrating on mastering an activity, there literally is nothing you can say to them that will help them. There is literally nothing you can say to them that will help. Because anything you do is going to interrupt their concentration. And remember, the constructor is working at the fringe of its capabilities, right? The reason it's constructing is it doesn't have it yet. It hasn't built the template. That's why it's constructing. And so that means that working memory, which is fragile, and perceptual sort of fleeting sensations on the fringe of consciousness are coalescing to build a new structure. I really love the way you're coloring. Is that a lion? That's a nice lion, Jonathan. Good lion drawing. Good lion drawing. You can't help it. You can't help it. And it's literally the last thing they need. Oh, it's so hard to let go. You'll nod your head sagely and say, I was thinking that already. And then you go home and praise your child. That's what you'll do. We must work harder here.
We will work harder and faster. But to close, one of the things I often talk about is this work that we do. I sometimes use the word sacred. It's sacred work we do. And Steve, listening to you tonight, along with poetically massaging and stimulating our brains, it's a reminder to me that whether we are doing this work as parents, as administrators, as Montessori teachers, as the 50 members of our staff that'll be with you tomorrow morning, as board members, this is big work we're doing. This work we're doing with our youngest children, it's really, really big work.
Thanks for having me.